Hello everyone, this is session 11, a focus on multicultural gifted education in the classroom. Today I'll be discussing the summary of Margie K. Catano's study called A Multicultural Educational Perspective on Serving Culturally Diverse Gifted. And this was written in 1991, and I feel like that date is relevant, not because students aren't facing the same issues as they were, they definitely are. However, some of the statements about the research that is or isn't available, I believe to be different now. The volume of the research that wasn't there in 91 has improved. So that's something to keep in mind as we go forward. So Catano starts off with the current situation in 1991, and she states that while there has been a lot of research on multicultural groups, there is not a lot of research on multicultural gifted children. And the contemporary research of the time focused mostly on achievement differences among cultural groups. And they also focused on the variables that contributed to those differences. There was no real focus on issues within the groups themselves. There is heterogeneity within each ethnic group, and clumping them together shows the systematic bias behind some of this research. Catano then goes on to discuss the two main viewpoints we have of culturally diverse students. On one end, we have the assimilationist view, and to quote Catano, she says, "This view favors relinquishment of original culture by members of diverse ethnic groups and absorption of these members into the core or predominant culture." And in 1991, Catano stated that most of the nation's schools had an assimilationist view of educating multicultural students. And the reason behind this view is that they believed, however misguided, that by treating all students the same way and asking them to become the same thing, we have enabled students to compete with each other later in life. On the other hand, we have the pluralist view. And again, to quote Catano, the pluralist view supports diverse ethnic groups' retention of original culture within the boundaries necessary to maintain and advance society as a whole. And when you look at the two views side by side, on one end, we're asking students, in the assimilationist view, we're asking students to change. We're asking the way they think and learn and process. We want that to change. On the pluralist view, we're asking schools to change the way they think about student learning. So those are going to be the two primary differences between those two views. Catano goes on to discuss the ways in which gifted education leaders of that time viewed teaching of gifted students. And we have one of two ways here. On one end, we have equality of treatment, and with intentional quotation marks. For the equality of treatment, this was defined as students are not going to receive differentiated instruction according to their needs and differences. They're going to be treated the same and be required to learn and use the same process. Then we have individualization. Today we have more of a positive connotation with that word, but Catano used this word to say that students receive differentiated instruction according to their individualized learning needs. However, the focus was far too academic, and it didn't focus on the child as a whole, and it wasn't correlated with cultural differences. So, for example, if there was a language barrier, that would be the key focus. And instead of having that child show their strengths, they would focus on that language barrier until that was overcome. Both of these approaches, according to Catano, ignore the core problem of low representation of diversity in gifted programs, and that's discrimination against non-mainstream groups. That's our main concern here. And if we ignore culture and do not value culture, then there's not going to be that fundamental change we're looking for in the classroom. Another equally important problem Catano brings to attention is identification. In her table that she used from 1989-1990, we see that the percent of non-white students in these states does not match the percent of the gifted representation of those students. And we know that identification is one of the most important aspects of the gifted education program in order to keep it equitable. And what Catano pointed out was that there has been extensive research at this time. There was extensive research on appropriate assessment practices for different kinds of students and different kinds of intelligences. And in 91, schools were still mostly using standardized measures to identify gifted students. So in many scenarios, students are In addition to identification problems, there are also struggles within ethnic communities when it comes to gifted education. Identifying a culturally diverse student as gifted may cause concern among groups who value community over individual differences. And while that should be recognized and understood, I think it's important for educators and administrators to sit down with those parents and families and communities and discuss how inappropriate gifted education does in fact benefit the community as a whole. And that's the end goal. In addition to some of these community issues, there are also those who feel that there's no need to focus on a handful of multicultural gifted students when there's such a large achievement gap in the regular education classroom. So there are those that believe if you have a wonderful, differentiating, multicultural, fabulous classroom teacher who is doing all he or she can to help every single student in that classroom, that is still not a replacement for a gifted education for those students who have those talents. They are truly exceptional, and that's something that we need to always keep in mind. Gifted students are exceptional, and an enriched classroom is wonderful, and it will help achieve what we are hoping for in closing the achievement gaps. However, it's not providing gifted students the services that they deserve. Next, Catano goes into two different school philosophies that clearly align with the assimilationist view and the pluralist view. So on one end, we have the intervention philosophy, and this philosophy sees children's cultural attributes as deficits, limits to their potential. So one example we have is a gifted child who has not yet mastered the English language is prevented from participating in creative writing activities until English is better grasped. There is a fundamental misunderstanding of that child's skills and talents at this point in time. The teacher is holding an assimilationist view that that child must do things in the same way that other children do things in order to master content, material, and understand. However, on the other end, we have the empowerment view, which allows children to use their strengths to demonstrate understanding of a concept and interact with the material. So, to provide a parallel example, a student who has not yet mastered English can write in their own language. If they are gifted, they will be able to show their talents through writing in their own language. Or they could also choose to create a pictorial essay that would demonstrate some of the themes that the teacher is looking for. This aligns with the pluralist view that by embracing cultural differences, we can improve society as a whole. Then Catano provides us with research strategies that work within the empowerment framework. And the first and most important is going to be child-centered learning. Child-centered learning is not the same as individualization. According to the way Catano frames this, individualization focuses too much on the academic process, whereas child-centered learning is going to focus on the whole child, the academic, the social, the emotional, the cultural, the whole being of that child. And that's where we can empower our multicultural students. Within that child-centered learning, when teachers encourage self-expression, it allows students to, again, demonstrate their strengths instead of having their culture be seen as a deficit. Next, it's important for students to have mentors. We know that the makeup of our American teacher population does not look the same as the makeup of our American student population. Again, there's a diversity gap. So it's of the utmost importance that students have mentors that have a similar background or have had the same cultural experiences. So they have that person that they can go to when they need it. And sort of along that same theme, counseling is also very important. We do know that a lot of our multicultural students experience discrimination and racism and general social injustice or stereotyping and prejudice. We know that that's an experience they have. Counselors are able to support those students through those times, and counselors can also act as a liaison between parents and students, allowing everyone to come together to make sure that student is receiving academically, socially, what they need in the classroom. We also know that the more parents and community is involved in a school, the better students are going to perform. And we should look at more than just, parent and community volunteering. That's very important. However, we also need parents and community on board with gifted education programming. It's important for the community to understand that gifted education programming is providing rights to those students, and it's allowing the community to flourish. It is not focusing on just a couple of kids in an elite way. It's improving the society as a whole. Next, Catano mentions focusing on student strengths and allowing students to utilize higher order thinking skills. But within those things, we should be using home language and culture in the programming when we allow students to show their strengths and use critical thinking and higher order thinking. We must allow students to do that through the avenue that they can do it best, and not try and fit students into the same little box and the same little assembly line. Catano's last major section is focused on curriculum. And to quote her, she says, "The goal of a multicultural gifted education is to produce citizens who, through thoughtful reflection and critical analysis, recognize social injustice and work toward the creation of a more equitable society as personal choice dictates." And so again, we have our two views here, the assimilationist and the pluralist. On the assimilationist side, there may be multicultural education. There may be stories and events and different perspectives. However, what the assimilationist view lacks in their curriculum is the focus on injustice and racism and other discriminatory factors that students experience every day in the real world. On the pluralist side, I'll go ahead and read Catano's quote here. "The history and experiences of oppressed groups, analysis of social institutions, conceptualizations of the ideal society, and processes for effective change would be added to the curriculum. Such additions would address the needs of some culturally diverse students who face personal identity issues and conflicts with peers when they excel in academic pursuits." So the importance here is not just to, have stories from around the world, for example, but it's to truly focus on the issues each group must face day to day and in their history. And now we've come to our last slide. This is the discussion I would like you to participate in. This slide will be duplicated in the ELC discussion area. I do have one last thing I would like to ask you to do. There is a TED Talk that very much aligns with this reading and brings it into the current day's discussion. And the speaker is Jen Holliday, who has been involved with Denver Public Schools for a number of years. And she speaks to authenticity in curriculum as well as focusing on social injustice through curriculum. And I think it's a very interesting video that would go very well with our reading. And then I would like you to please respond to 2 of the following 3 discussion questions, some related to the video, some related to the reading. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to participating in your discussion posts on ELC.